Hi, and welcome to episode number 85 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, the show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. This is Sarah Sinacroce, I'm your host, and this is the last and final episode under the name of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. Sniff. I started this show in 2016, and it's one of the best things I ever did. A podcast is one of the best ways to build relationships and to get people you never thought you'd have a chance to talk to talk to you. And like today's guest, he has been on my wish list since the beginning, and I'm really beyond thrilled to have him on for this final episode. The guest I'm talking about is Jeffrey Shaw, host of the Creative Warriors podcast that I've been listening to for a very long time. He has been a huge inspiration to me over the years, and his book LINGO, Discover Your Ideal Customer's Secret Language, was part of the research for my anxiety-free marketing program. So yes, I couldn't be more thrilled to have Jeffrey on for today's last show. Having a keen eye isn't just for what one sees, but also for what one senses. Having been one of the most sought-after portrait photographers in the US for more than 3 decades, Jeffrey Shaw, aka the Lingo Guy, uses this honed intuition to teach entrepreneurs how to attract their ideal customers by speaking their secret language. Jeffrey is the host of the popular business podcast Creative Warriors, a nationally acclaimed keynote speaker, a TEDx speaker, a business coach for entrepreneurs, and the author of the best-selling book LINGO, Discover Your Ideal Customer's Secret Language and Make Your Business Irresistible. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jeffrey. Enjoy. Hi, Jeffrey. How are you today?
I'm great, Sarah. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, I'm so excited. You've been on my wish guest list for a while. I am a big fan of your podcast, so I'm excited to have you here as a fellow introvert. I think I've heard you mention it a couple of times, so I'm like, okay, this is a guy that I need to talk to. So looking forward to our conversation.
Excellent.
So tell me, Jeffrey, tell me, in the intro, I read your official bio, but I'm much more interested in the non-official stuff. So tell us about you, the introvert. I know you had a photography business and how that all plays to, who you are today and how your introversion also plays a role in what you do today.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I think, people would probably have a hard time believing that I still claim myself to be an introvert today, right? Because I'm out in the world, and one of my favorite thing to do is to speak on stages as a professional speaker and be in front of hundreds or thousands of people. It's the thing I enjoy the most. But that's I think the confusion a lot of people have about introverts is that there are a lot of situations, for example, public speaking. There are a lot of professional speakers that in fact will identify as introverts. And I hang out with a lot of professional speakers, and many will claim to be introverts. And I think the reason for that is, I think there are many reasons. One, as introverts, we are inherently used to being uncomfortable, right? I mean, when you're an introvert, if that's how you identify, that's your upbringing, every social situation is uncomfortable.
Right.
So being on stage is really not any different,
That's
so right. So you're used to navigating that. And when you're on stage, you are a show of one. So again, it's not unusual as an introvert to find yourself in that situation. We enjoy the limelight when we can get it, right? I mean, part of being an introvert is, and that's the I think the dichotomy that people don't understand about introversion as well, is that a lot of us want to be alone. That's how we recharge in our alone time. But we still crave attention because there's a good chance that's been lacking in our life, right? I mean, part of why we're an introvert, it's like a chicken and egg, which came first? Are we an introvert because we didn't get attention, or did we not get attention because we're an introvert? I'm not sure which, right? But we can be an introvert, we can identify as an introvert, but still have a craving for attention. And again, once again, as a speaker, it's like, wow, people are paying attention to me, and this is a new experience. And then, you and I could go on and on. I mean, the introverts have higher levels of empathy. We read the room really well. So for all those reasons, we're highly functional in very public formats, such as professional speaking.
What I've noticed with these conversations with introverts, it seems like there's about a 50-50%. Like a 50% of introverts tell me, oh, no, that's definitely not for me, not even think about putting me on a stage. The other 50, they say what you just said, and actually they prefer to be in that spotlight rather than having to go to a conference where they're not the speaker and then they have to, mingle and make conversation. It's much easier for an introvert to be there on stage and then people come to them after, right? Would you agree with that?
I would. And in fact, sometimes that's more challenging, right? It's almost easier sometimes to be on stage. And believe me, never in a million years did I think that I would be a professional speaker. Right. The time that I decided to be a speaker, it was really a personal challenge, which I think I do often. And again, I think introverts do that often. Introverts are often challenging ourselves to step outside of our shell a little bit. Mm-hmm. We incrementally, I saw on another podcast years ago about introversion. And we got talking about how so often people talk about jumping out of your comfort zone. You almost feel like you're torn outside of your comfort zone. That's sort of the way a lot of people talk about it. Where for introverts, I think what we need to do is we need to expand our comfort zone.
Yeah. I remember that conversation with Beth Bulow.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think it's a much easier way for us to be. So I feel like throughout my life, I've always expanded, which is how in the end, we end up never appearing to the world like an introvert.
No.
Right? Because my world has expanded so much and I don't mind the public forum and I don't mind the attention. In fact, I quite like the attention, but that's because it's been a series of expanding the comfort zone, which is what speaking was to me. When I decided to be a speaker, I never imagined I could do it. And I will tell you, the first action I took when I decided that I wanted to take on the challenge of professional speaking and expand my comfort zone, the first thing I did is I hired an acting coach, not a speaking coach, but an acting coach. And I did that because one thing I felt that actors understood and has proven to be true is actors know how to find their true role when they're nervous. And that's the way I wanted to show up on stage, because I felt like as an introvert, my biggest challenge is some other character shows up when I'm nervous. Mm-hmm. Right? As an introvert, I don't like the persona that shows up when I'm uncomfortable. Right. And I wanted to show up authentically as a speaker. So I took on training from an acting coach so that I could learn how to maintain that centeredness and authenticity when I'm nervous, which I think for a lot of introverts is our ultimate challenge.
Yeah. And there's this difference between what you just said, the acting helped you with, so stay within the authenticity, and actually putting on a mask. Right? That's different. And because then you don't show up authentically anymore and people can probably feel and sense that. And you as the introvert feel like you're lacking integrity, and that definitely doesn't feel good for an introvert.
Absolutely. It was the first thing I'd said to this acting coach that I hired. I said, look, the last thing I want to learn is how to put on an act. What I want to learn is how to show up authentically when I'm nervous.
Yeah.
But that's what actors can do. There's a role inside of themselves. And in a way, I love this quote by RuPaul, the drag queen. The quote by RuPaul is, "We're born naked. The rest of life is drag." And it represents that, right? We were born pure and authentic, and the rest of life is a series of covering, especially as an introvert. So much of the fears and shyness and covers up our truth, our authenticity, that really our job is to bring that back out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing with anxiety-free marketing, because I feel like I've been wearing this mask when marketing my business for the last 10 years. And I'm like, that's enough. No more masks.
Yeah. So I'd be really interested I look forward to reading that myself, because I think part of the challenge of introverts in business, introverted entrepreneurs, is that the way we observe the way business is done by other people is so innately uncomfortable to us. Mm-hmm. And so we are looking for a new way of marketing. I just interviewed somebody from my podcast who did some research, and actually it was kind of sidebar research. It wasn't really the main part. The interview itself was about culture, about company culture. He wound up coming across a research that showed that introverts were infinitely better at handling customer service situations than extroverts, which again, as an introvert makes perfect sense, right? If somebody has a customer service issue, you and I both know an introvert is probably going to handle that much better because we're much more likely to be empathetic. We're much more likely to listen.
Right.
We're much more likely to kind of get on the side of the person having the struggle and saying, I get it. I hear what you're saying. Let me see what I can do to solve the problem.
Right.
But the research has proven that I think introverted marketing is better marketing. I think introverted customer service is better customer service.
That's so interesting that there's actually research that, stats that prove that. Yeah. Wow. So what about your introverted superpowers other than, speaking on stage and empathy? What comes to mind?
I have to go back to empathy. I mean, I think, two things, I guess. I guess I'd also say I often, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I have a very diverse business model, and I'm prone to chasing squirrels like a lot of us creatives are. But I'm okay with that. And that's part of the reason why my following, is committed to me and my beliefs, because I try to unleash them from the shackles of a world telling them they have to sit still, focus on one thing and pick a niche. Mm-hmm. And I'm out there saying, no, creative people are going to chase squirrels. They may need to be harnessed to go in a healthy direction, but you're never going to shut that down. And the shutting down of chasing the squirrels, what's lost? I believe introverts and I believe creative people often see more, hear more, and feel more. Why would you want to shut that down? One of the common denominators for me, but what I do try to help people that I coach, what I try to help them find in themselves is something core. And it doesn't have to be a purpose or a why, but what's the connection between all the things that you're passionate about or that get your interest? And for me, the theme that I come back to all the time is being a witness. And I truly believe the foundation of that is introversion, because as a really shy, introverted child, I would say I observed a lot, as introverts often do, right? I sat back and watched life and therefore studied it and studied human behavior. Mm-hmm. And I chose photography as a profession specifically because it was easy to withdraw. Back in the day when I started, there were dark rooms. So a lot of the work was done in the dark room, which was perfect for an introvert. Even being out in the world, there's always a camera between, me and the outer world. So it really was the perfect profession for an introvert. The irony was that very quickly, even in high school, I was very good at it. Mm-hmm. So I suddenly was put into the spotlight. I started getting all these national awards, and I went to photography school, and then I went on scholarship, and I graduated at the top of the class, and I had to give a speech at graduation. And so the very thing that I chose to stay out of the world actually threw me into the world, which was the ultimate irony. A lot of authors have told me the same thing. A lot of people often will choose being an author as a profession because it's reclusive. And then the book hits the New York Times bestseller list, right?
Like Susan Cain, right?
Right, exactly. Susan Cain's, Todd Henry's another one that comes to mind. A lot of authors have told me that. It's like, well, now I got to deal with my success. Yeah. So for me, I think the superpowers that being an introvert has really provided for me is, one is the art of observation. And then secondly is empathy, which to me truly has served as a true superpower for me, because not only has empathy allowed me to photograph people and really pull out their true nature, it serves me as a professional speaker because I can read the room and I can change my content on the spot if need be based on what I'm feeling from the room. But it also has enabled me to stay ahead of market trends. Highly, highly sensitive.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. Highly sensitive to what's going on in the world, how the market is changing, and most importantly, how the needs of the people that I serve are changing, and how I need to change my business to continue to be successful. I think it's the number one reason why I've been able to exist in business for 35 years is because of my adaptability, because of the empathy and sensitivity I have to the changing needs of the people I serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you ever taken one of those highly sensitive people tests?
I've taken so many different things, Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs. The one that I actually love the most as far as an assessment of one's personality is Sally Hogshead's Fascination Advantage Assessment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That actually has been the most useful because, again, probably true to the introvert nature, right? I mean, you take Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, it's nice to find out about yourself. But at the end of the day, as an introvert and as a giving person, I really want to know how I can serve others. And what the Fascination Advantage Assessment does is it allows you, to me, it's the only test that really lets you know how the world sees you. Mm-hmm. Because we can see ourselves a certain way all we want. But at the end of the day, what's really valuable is how does the world see you? What does the world find fascinating about you? And how can you leverage that?
And it's so interesting how it's not always aligned, or actually often not aligned, right? You see yourself one way and then
Absolutely.
find out that the world sees you in a complete different way.
Yeah. Well, that's, I did a TEDx talk on that very topic. My TEDx talk is about how others see more in us than we see in ourselves, and how it's the only way that I know of to really reach heights beyond your imagination, because by nature, whatever we expect of ourselves is as far as we're likely to go. But expectation, by definition, is a predetermined outcome. So we go through our lives having predetermined what we think we're capable of. And for us introverts, we have a pretty limited view of what we think we're capable of. And the only way out of that closet of expectation is to start listening to how other people see us, because often other people see in us more than we see in ourselves. People often see our greatness before we're able to see it or admit it to ourselves. Right. And that's the foundation of my TEDx talk.
I agree to the last point you made. I'm not sure that introverts sometimes don't have, I actually feel that some introverts have these really high ambitions, but then we struggle with this weight. I told my therapist sometimes that I feel like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders. It feels like I need to change the world. And yet I'm like, I don't know how to do it. Right. Yeah. And so I think we sometimes have really big expectations for ourselves, but in a way we're lacking the courage to putting ourselves out there to actually make these changes that we want.
And I think that's a really important stage, right? I think to me that represents your own growth of admission, which admission is a very hard step for a lot of people. And what I mean by that is that it's willing to admit to ourselves that there's something special about us, or that we have something that we can offer. I know for me, certainly in the earlier years as a youth, looking, and as an introvert, I didn't expect much of myself. I couldn't imagine, honestly, I didn't imagine I would amount to much. Right? Because all I saw was limitation. I grew up in a small country town. I was very introverted. Everybody around me was, more outgoing, and I did not expect much of myself. I think that a later stage of that is the stage of which I agree with you. I think a lot of introverts are in this stage where they internally, because we do so much of our processing internally, they internally have recognized that there's greatness in them. And that's the admission part. And the next challenge is, how do I get that to show up? How do I live up to that? And that is a really frustrating stage, but a very, very important one to actually get to that stage of admission that I have something. I have something to offer the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the different MBTI types. So depends whether you are introverted and thinking or introverted and feeling. And I think those also play into that, how you feel about ambition and all of that. Yeah. What about then challenges? We talked about superpowers. What do you nowadays, now that you're speaking on these big stages, what's still challenging as an introvert in your business?
By far, I don't know that I've ever, and I've done hundreds of podcast interviews, I don't know that I've ever admitted this. By far, my biggest challenge is how personal I take it when I don't get recognized. I actually make a joke of this in my book, LINGO, but I don't know that anyone other than an introvert really gets it. But I joke about it in my book by saying that, am I the only one that takes it personal when the automatic faucet doesn't turn on? Right? I mean, you stand up, you're waving your hands, like, why is it, even then it's like, am I the only one that takes this personal, that even the faucet thinks I'm invisible? Right? And I've joked about it, and other people have said, no, they go through, they get so frustrated. But I mean, I deeply take it personal, and not so much with the faucet, but because of my nature as an introvert, I take it very personal when I'm not recognized. When I see, especially as a speaker now, because I see a lot of other speakers around me getting a lot of attention. And quite honestly, I don't know if the attention they're getting is as justified. I mean, I know I put out such quality work. I put out such quality interviews on my podcast. So many of my podcast guests come on and say, that was the best interview I've ever done. So I read every book, so I'm very thorough. Yeah. I put so much effort into the talks that I give, and I'm just a quality-oriented person. I'd rather put time into producing quality than rushing anything through. So some of these authors, I read their books and I don't think it's all that great or earth-shattering, and yet the amount of attention they get in the world is huge. And hey, they may deserve it. They may have a really good marketing machine, but I take that personal. It's like, oh, why don't I get the attention? I don't think my book's done well, but I thought it was going to do better. The TEDx talk's done okay. I thought it would have blown up. So I still take those moments when I don't quite get the attention that I had hoped for more personal than I think an extrovert would. Because it's still very, that gut feeling in my stomach as an introvert is still there. Like, hello, I'm here. No one's seeing me. That to me is a challenge that I'm constantly working with.
Right. Where an extrovert would probably just
move on,
go back and say, or speaking even louder and make even more
right.
Where you internalize it and it's this voice in your head that then goes, analyzes everything, right?
And to that point, there have been a couple occasions where I did feel completely overlooked. Didn't get a speaking gig that I really felt I should have. And there have been 2 times that I can think of. Maybe there's a third toss in there somewhere, but there could be 2 to 3 times where I behaved like an extrovert because I was frustrated. I was overlooked, and I stood up for myself. And in every case, I got what I wanted. And I realized, wow, there is an advantage here. I can see, I wouldn't change being an introvert for anything. I think there's by far more advantages to being an introvert. But it is interesting in that regard that it's like, wow, when I stood up for myself, I actually got what I was seeking.
So
that's my challenge, though, is doing that more often.
Yeah, it's about choosing your battles, because that takes more energy for us to do that. Yeah. And so I guess it's about choosing your battles and saying, no, but this one, I'm going to stand up for it and, act like the extrovert in the room. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Wow. Take me to a story, tell me a story about this big aha moment that you had, whether it was, before you started Creative Warriors or something that happened with a client, some kind of story that you can tell the audience.
By far, a life-changing moment for me. So I actually shared this story once when I was on stage speaking at a national convention, and I was running a little ahead of schedule, because I could see I still had 7 minutes left because there was a timekeeper in the back of the room. And I was like, I'm pretty much out of content, but I have 7 minutes left. So I wove this story in, and it turned out to be the most moving part of the whole talk. People were in tears. And because I realized there were so many introverts in this room that totally understood what I was saying. So this moment, and it truly was a life-changing moment for me. And in fact, it was the initiator behind one of those times when I stood up for myself. So I was away at a weekend retreat, which I'd gone to at the last minute. So I flew out to California for this retreat, and we were told that we were going to play a game. And part of the game was that all the participants in this retreat were going to be split in half. And I apparently audibly let out an angst. I went, oh, something like that, because the coach was like, something wrong with that, Jeff? And I was like, I hate games. I was just really honest. I just said, I hate games. And I do. It's I don't like game playing. I don't like game playing in business. I don't like game playing in dating. I've never done any sports. Any sports that I ever did were things like tennis or skiing, more solo sports. I'm not a team sport player, because as an introvert, that scared the crap out of me.
Right.
So I resisted this game that this coach wanted to play. But the outcome of the game was what was life-changing, because I realized that the reason I didn't like playing games in my life, or because I didn't like playing games, which to me represented, and I can't say sports are inauthentic at all, right? But there was something in the elementary school experience, kickball, things like that, that what I did is I retreated to the back of the line. Yeah. So I was always that introvert, that solo kid, which was the last one left that one team was forced to take. Nobody ever wanted me on their team. Right.
We all know those moments.
We all know that feeling. And because I didn't, and then of course it's such a catch-22, but because you don't participate in the sport very often, you're not very good at it. So then nobody wants you for that reason either. But I was always the last kid standing there. And it was the putting myself in the back of the line thing that I realized as an adult, that I can't complain about not being seen if I'm putting myself in the back of the line. Mm-hmm. And that was the life-changing moment where I said, if I want to be seen, I have to be willing to stand at the front of the line. And it was that awareness. It was kind of unfolding. So it was rooted in the fact that I hate an authenticity. I hate game playing. I'm a single guy, I'm in a relationship, but, I spent a lot of my life single, and I hate all dating advice because it's all game playing, right? I mean, if I like you, I'm going to tell you. And if the rest of the world says, oh, you don't rush, don't say anything too quick. It's like, but that's just a game. I'm going to share what's authentic in my heart, right? I can't stand the games. I can't stand the games of life. So I realized it was because of that I put myself in the back of the line. But I was like, you know what? If you want to play in the arena, you can't be in the back of the line. So that, I think, was probably a turning point moment for me when, as an introvert, I became more committed to what I needed to do in order to be in service to the world than worrying about myself. In that moment, I realized a certain sense of selfishness in being an introvert. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that to have a negative impact on your introverts listening, but for me, I felt an inner feeling of self-centeredness, which was very contradictory to how I felt as an introvert. But yet I felt like if I'm going to keep being an introvert, I'm just focusing on my own emotions a lot. I'm struggling in my own world, but it's my world. And if I want to be in service to the world, I had to get out of that. I became more committed to being in service to others than I was committed to protecting myself. And that really, and this was prior to the podcast. This was prior to the book, prior to TEDx, prior to that was the person that's unrecognizable today. But that was a turning point moment that enabled me to, step into my bigness as I am today.
That's really interesting. Can you share about what age you were at that point? I'm just wondering if it has to also.
So I would say it was about, So I'm now 55. I just turned 55. And this was probably 6-7 years ago. Okay. So late 40s at that point, because my podcast is now 5 years old. And again, the podcast was a personal challenge as well. It was launching Creative Warriors was another moment of comfort zone expansion.
Right.
Because as a photographer, at that time I was doing some speaking. I was primarily a photographer, and I felt like I was a professional guest. I was always the guest, right? I was always because I photograph on location. So I was always a guest in my clients' homes or their offices. Or I was the one always asking for the bathroom. And, and as a speaker, you're the guest at an event. Right. And I started wondering, again, I was looking at my own value as a guest. Part of being a guest is I almost felt like I was forcing myself in situations. Like I was forcing myself in the room. And I wondered if I was worth coming to. Mm-hmm. So I started the podcast in order to be a host, to really answer the question for myself, would anybody show up? Would guests show up? Would listeners show up? Now, the joke of it is, again, this is what happens to us introverts, right? We stretch our comfort zone, and often we're shocked at the results. When I started the podcast, I was in a leadership program, and I told my cohort of leaders that I ultimately wanted to impact 50,000 lives a year. The podcast now reaches 30,000 people a month.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just the podcast, let alone the book and the TEDx talk and, my professional speaking. I mean, I can't even calculate the number of lives I actually impact in a year.
Yeah. No, that's
all because
amazing.
of that, right? All because of that moment that I decided that I wondered if I was worth people showing up for. And that's why I started the podcast.
The reason I asked you if you remember your age is because I truly think that it's almost we have to grow into this maturity as introverts where, sometimes around 40, you're like, okay, but now it's going to be about me. And, like you said, I put myself in front of the line, and I can see that is more challenging in a corporate situation, and you have a bit more freedom in the entrepreneurship. But even then, you have to come to this maturity where it's like, okay, even though I'm an introvert, this is what I need right now.
Yeah, I think so too. I think another thing that a lot of us introverts have experienced is people try to force us out of our introversion too early. Mm-hmm. In our youth, whether it's, in my case, parents that were trying to force me to join Little League because my older brothers did, and being dragged to the baseball field, which turned out to be a traumatic life moment for me because literally they're dragging me across the field because they felt was a boy and I should do this. And it only makes you pull back further, right? So if we ourselves or people around us try to pull us out of our introversion before our own level of maturity is ready for it, I think it can do more damage. I think we need to manage on our own. And yet, and I encourage your listeners to think along the lines of expanding your comfort zone, right? But I think we have to be empowered to do that ourselves. I think when it's forced upon us, it only causes us to retreat more. So I agree with you. I think it takes a considerable amount of maturity to grow into that transitional point when you're really just step out in the world in a bigger way.
Yeah. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. We're coming to the end, but I have two really important questions I want to still ask you. The first one is about marketing with integrity. What does that mean to you, and how do you apply that in your business?
To me, marketing with integrity is a sort of what we were saying before. It's marketing in a way that's true to you. I think one of the challenges I think I originally, when I started unpacking the difference in the world in marketing, I think I originally was thinking that it was creatives needed a different way of marketing because the rest of the world markets very aggressively in ways that are uncomfortable to the creative person. But I think the same thing can be said of introverts, right? I think, and now I'm pleased to say that I think this is a movement worldwide. I think the world is more ready today for business to be done in a different way. That's why I wrote my book, LINGO. I mean, at the basis of what I want to share through my message of LINGO is that the world is ready for businesses to speak to them in a way that makes the customer feel like this business really gets me, right? That I'm not just a demographic. I'm not just an avatar or a buyer persona, which are at best projections of who you think I am. But that as a business or a brand, you've chosen to actually get me, to understand my values, my priorities. And I think the world is, demanding that. I think the world of consumers is demanding that more than ever. So I actually think we are headed into a time of far greater marketing with integrity, because if you don't, you're going to be called out. It's such a transparent world that, as we've seen many times with companies and CEOs of companies whose behavior becomes questionable, and the masses of people that leave those companies instantly because we hold companies to a very high standard today, a high standard of integrity and transparency. So I'm pleased to say, I think, but again, to me, it's another indicator that introverts rule, right? A strange thing happened to me years ago on a podcast interview where I was being interviewed, and it actually, in a way, was part of the motivator to write LINGO. I was on a podcast, and the host asked me what I felt the future of human evolution was. Now, mind you, this was a business podcast. I'm not qualified to answer that question, right? What do I think but the only way I could answer it was from the perspective of who I am as an entrepreneur and what I've observed in business. And what I had said was, I believe the future of human evolution, and therefore the future of business, and to your point, the future of marketing, is that people will make decisions from an energetic quality in the future more than ever. Right. And actually, the way I had said to him, I said, I think we're heading towards a world of less communication, and not they're going to be talking less. But in my 35 years in business, I can see the transition where people decide who they want to do business with based on how they feel about that company, more than whether they're the best at what they do. Because you can be absolutely the best at what you do, but I will choose to not work with you because I don't like you.
Totally. And that's what your book does so beautifully, right? And the other quote that I was just trying to bring up is this quote by Daniel H. Pink, who says exactly what you just said, is this human evolution. We've progressed from a society of farmers to a society of factory workers to a society of knowledge workers. And now we're progressing yet again to a society of creators and empathizers, of pattern recognizers and meaning makers.
Wow, what book? I mean, I'm a huge fan of Dan Pink, and I've actually had him on my podcast. What book is that?
That is A Whole New Mind by Daniel.
I have not read that one. That's perfect, perfectly aligned. I've always been a huge fan of his work, and I think in part because there's been an alignment of our observations. And gosh, that's so beautifully said.
Yeah, it's I highly recommend it. That's kind of been the basis of my new marketing program, and together with your book and other work. But his way of looking at not just marketing, but business. And it's not recent. So he knew that all along, that we're at this tipping point and that something has to change, that people are tired of this old way of aggressive marketing, right? He's knew that all along. And
I think I love that you just said that too, because it also, again, points out the introverts. So I think us introverts, we often have these thoughts. And I've been thinking this way all along. My whole life, I've been observing the world and looking around saying, this is all wrong.
Right? And yet we're like,
I haven't vocalized it. The extrovert tends to get it out in the world first.
Yeah.
And that can be a frustration for introverts, because I feel like a lot of times, I think us introverts, a lot of times our thoughts are ahead of others, but we're slow to get it out there because the extrovert is so vocal and gets it out there quicker.
Is Daniel an extrovert?
I don't know. It's a good question. I would think so.
Okay.
But it's hard to tell, because I've interviewed them. And again, it depends on how one identifies themselves. And then, what we haven't spoken about at all today is, because it's always a source of controversy too, is there's different definitions of introvert versus extrovert, right? Some people look at it as behavior. I behave as an introvert, or I behave as an extrovert. But clinically, whether you're an introvert or extrovert can be defined by how you recharge. Right. So I can behave like an extrovert, but recharge as an introvert, meaning I need to recharge when I'm alone. So people have chosen their own way. I mean, I tend to be an introvert. Like I behave, well, I don't know. I mean, most people think I probably behave more like an extrovert, but I definitely recharge as an introvert.
What we use here on this podcast is the energy recharging definition. So clearly I'm outside because I'm an INFJ, so feeling. So I'm actually very good with people. I'm not shy at all. And I can even do networking events if you pay me for it. But then at the end of the workshop, I'm like, okay, time to recharge and just go home and be alone. So it's in my speaking contract, we actually have it in my speaking contract that I do not automatically commit to any events the night before a speaking engagement. Because a lot of organizations expect that I'm going to show up, attend a cocktail party, network and schmooze, and then get on the stage the next day. And that I can't do it. So I have it in my contract that as an introvert, I recognize in order for me to give my best performance for you and to provide the audience the best value, that I do not commit to attending events the night before. I apologize. It's not that I'm trying to be snooty, but I'm trying to reserve my energy so that I can do my best job. I have it in my contract. It's like an introvert. I told my VA when she's creating it, so let's call this the introversion clause. That's a great tip for fellow introverted speakers. Make note of that. Yeah, this has been wonderful. Jeffrey, thank you so much. I always end with the last question, and it's kind of a mindful ending. What are you grateful for today or this week?
Gosh, I'd say I'm most grateful for the building of a new loving relationship in my life. It's been a bit of a journey for me, having been in and out of relationships and really finding myself. I came out late in life. I came out when I was 39. I'd been married for 19 years prior. I'd been divorced for married for 19 years, divorced for 5 years, came out. And it's been a bit of a journey for me to discover myself in my authenticity. So I've had a bit of I've had battles with finding the right, because a lot of us do is there's a pattern of bad choices. And I think I've made a good choice now. And I'm really, really grateful for what has so far been the building of a very healthy, loving relationship. So without a doubt, that is foremost on my mind for what I'm grateful for.
I'm very happy for you having kind of followed your stories. Very happy for you that this seems to be the one. So really.
We're certainly working towards that. It's like the hesitation is only in that. I mean, he's a fantastic guy, and I truly do believe that he very well may be. But it's that little bit of reservation. Like I had said to him, there was a point where when we met, I sent him a note and I said I compared meeting him to what I imagined seeing the Northern Lights is like the first time.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right? When you just there's that gasping of air and that awe. It's like, really?
Really?
So I'm still in awe, I think, of, wow, is this what came along? But as you know, especially as introverts, it takes us a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. Tell me about it. But then once we made up our mind, we're usually in very stable and loving relationships. So you're lucky, but he's just as lucky. So
Well, that's funny you should say that. That's always been when I shifted in my own mind what I was looking for in a loving relationship, I decided that what I wanted to find was a relationship where both people felt like they were the luckiest ones.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if both people feel that way, that's a healthy relationship.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me on this show. It's been a true pleasure. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. Please go check out the creativewarriorsunite.com website. He has a podcast that I highly recommend. Also, look at his book on Amazon called LINGO. And finally, Jeffrey has a free review of your website that you can access at lingoreview.com. As always, you'll find this episode's show notes at sarahsanacroce.com/episode 85. And again, as of August 30th, you'll find your favorite show under a new name and brand called The Gentle Business Revolution. Same intro music, as I've come to love it so much, and I think it's a perfect fit with gentleness. And don't worry, it's not going to be focused only on introverts anymore, but introverts are gentle, so I think you'll still be in the right place. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.